The escape pod howled like a wounded animal. Commander Jack Sullivan gripped the harness straps as the vessel tore through the purple atmosphere of Proxima b, leaving a blazing trail of superheated plasma behind it. Every seam and rivet in the pod's hull screamed under the strain, threatening to rip apart at any moment. The violent shaking rattled his bones, each jolt sending spikes of pain through his already bruised body. His thoughts raced to his crewmates, scattered across this alien system in identical pods, if they'd managed to eject at all before the ISV Odysseus broke apart. Structural integrity at 28%, Jack muttered to himself, voice steady despite the blood pounding in his temples. 15 years of special operations training had prepared him for keeping cool in crisis, though nothing had truly prepared him for watching his ship disintegrate around him. Atmospheric entry in 3. The alien world rushed up to meet him, its vast canopy of crimson vegetation spreading like a sea of blood below. Through the viewport, the alien landscape seemed almost to reach for him, hungry and waiting. 2. His knuckles whitened on the manual controls as the pod's navigation system flickered and died with a pathetic electronic whimper. Jack's mind flashed to the faces of his crew. Davis with her wry smile, Torres and his terrible jokes, Captain Reynolds, who trusted Jack as her second-in-command. All gone now, likely scattered across the cosmos or crushed in the implosion. 1. Impact. The world dissolved into chaos. Metal shrieked. Trees snapped like brittle bones. The escape pod bounced twice across the alien landscape, carving a half-mile trench through soil that smelled like burnt cinnamon and copper. Jack's head slammed forward against the restraints, then back against the headrest with enough force to make his vision blur. Stars exploded behind his eyelids as consciousness threatened to abandon him. Then silence fell. No, not quite silence. In the distance, a rhythmic pulsing sound, like drums or heartbeats, echoed through the alien forest. The sound seemed to resonate with something primal inside him, calling him forward, though to what end he couldn't imagine. The restraint release jammed. Jack yanked it 3 times before the mechanism finally gave with a wet click. He tumbled onto the pod's buckled floor, tasting blood where he'd bitten his cheek during the crash. The metallic flavor mixed with adrenaline, a cocktail of survival and fear. Smoke poured from the shattered control panel, acrid and thick with the scent of burnt circuitry and defeat. Each breath felt like inhaling liquid fire. He checked the emergency beacon first. Dead. It had flatlined the moment his ship had encountered the strange energy field surrounding this uncharted planet. Whatever force had dragged the ISV Odysseus from orbit and sent its crew scrambling for escape pods had also fried every piece of electronic equipment on board. His only link to humanity to rescue was nothing more than a worthless box of broken circuits. Standard protocol, he reminded himself, voice raspy in the acrid air. Assess, adapt, survive. Jack grabbed his survival pack, verified his sidearm was intact, standard issue plasma pistol with 3 charge cells, and kicked open the warped hatch of the escape pod. The frame gave with a screech of protesting metal, as if the pod itself was reluctant to release him into this alien world. The alien atmosphere hit him like a physical wall, hot, humid, thick with strange pollens that made his sinuses tingle and his eyes water. The crimson forest stretched in every direction, illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that pulsed blue-violet in the perpetual twilight beneath the dense canopy. The beauty of it struck him even through his fear. An entire ecosystem evolved without any human interference. Something that resembled a cross between a bat and a jellyfish drifted overhead, its translucent membranes rippling as it navigated between the towering trees. And those drums continued, rhythmic and hypnotic, pulling at something primal in the base of his brain. Jack tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the immediate tasks of survival, but the sound seemed to bypass his conscious mind entirely, tugging at instincts that predated civilization. Move, Sullivan, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the drum's strange effect. First rule of survival: never stay at the crash site. He had no way of knowing what might be drawn to the disturbance, what predators might investigate the foreign object that had torn through their habitat. His boots sank into moss that glowed pale lavender where he stepped, leaving a trail of luminescent footprints behind him. The air tasted sweet, almost intoxicatingly so, thick with alien spores that danced in the filtered sunlight. Every shadow might conceal predators. Every sound could signal death. The weight of complete isolation pressed against his chest. He might be the only human on this entire world, perhaps the only one who had survived the ship's destruction. But those drums promised something else entirely. Intelligence, purpose, perhaps even salvation. Firelight flickered through the trees ahead like a beacon. Jack crouched behind the gnarled trunk of a tree wider than a transport vehicle, its bark rough as sandpaper against his palm. The drums grew louder here, joined by voices, female voices, hundreds of them, singing in a language that sounded like crystal wind chimes in a storm. The melody carried emotions he couldn't name, but could somehow understand. Longing, celebration, determination, and something darker underneath it all. He followed the sounds for nearly an hour through the bioluminescent maze, drawn forward by a curiosity that his training said would likely get him killed. But standard protocols seemed irrelevant now. Establish contact with locals, assess threat level, survive until extraction, if extraction was even possible. The rhythm of the drums matched his heartbeat now, as though his body was physically synchronizing with this alien world. Jack edged forward, combat boots silent on the spongy forest floor. Through the undergrowth, firelight painted the scene in flickering amber and shadow. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he wondered if the alien atmosphere was playing tricks on his mind. Women, at least 200 of them, dancing around a massive bonfire that reached toward alien stars he didn't recognize. Their movements were precise yet fluid, telling a story he couldn't read but could somehow feel resonating in his bones. But these weren't human women. Their skin caught the firelight like polished sapphire, deep blue that shifted to azure where flames illuminated it. Platinum tattoos spiraled across their bodies, pulsing in rhythm with the drums, creating patterns that hurt to follow with human eyes. Mathematics beyond his comprehension, living equations that shifted and evolved with each movement. They wore minimal clothing, scraps of iridescent fabric that might have been silk or perhaps something grown rather than woven. Their hair ranged from white as fresh snow to black as deep space, adorned with jewels that chimed with each movement, adding percussive complexity to their song. And at the center, seated on a throne carved from what appeared to be a single massive diamond, sat their leader. Jack's mouth went dry, his heart stuttering in his chest. She was nearly 7 feet of lethal grace crowned with crystalline horns that curved elegantly from her temples. Her skin was darker blue than the others, like midnight ocean depths. Her tattoos didn't merely pulse, they blazed with internal light, creating constellations that shifted with each breath she took. Platinum hair fell to her waist in elaborate braids weighted with metals Jack couldn't identify. When she moved even slightly, every other woman oriented toward her like compass needles finding true north, as though their very existence depended on her presence. Their queen had to be. There was something ancient in her posture, a weight of centuries in her eyes that he could sense even from this distance. The dancing grew more frenzied. Women spun and leaped with inhuman flexibility, their voices rising to a crescendo that made Jack's teeth ache with its strange harmonics. The queen stood, raising arms decorated with platinum bands that reflected the firelight in impossible, fractal patterns. She spoke, her voice carrying over the chaos like honey poured over steel. Sisters, the alien word somehow translated in Jack's mind, a sensation like ice water trickling down his spine. The intrusion of her language into his thoughts felt intimate and invasive at once, as though some part of her had reached inside him and rearranged his neurons to facilitate understanding. Tonight we call to the cosmos. Tonight we demand what was stolen from us. Tonight, Jack shifted for a better view, his military training fighting with his curiosity. The branch beneath his boot snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Everything stopped. 200 faces turned toward his hiding spot. 200 sets of eyes, silver, violet, blue like Arctic ice, fixed on him with predatory focus. The silence felt physical, pressing against his eardrums after the cacophony of moments before. Perfect, Jack muttered, reaching slowly for his plasma pistol. Just perfect. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, he told himself, but from the adrenaline crash after surviving both a spaceship destruction and a crash landing within the same hour. They moved like quicksilver, fluid, coordinated, inevitable. Jack barely had time to stand before they surrounded him, a living wall of blue skin and barely contained violence. Up close, he could see details the firelight had hidden. Scars that looked ceremonial rather than accidental, telling stories of battles and rituals he couldn't comprehend. Muscles that coiled under skin like steel cables under tension, suggesting strength far beyond human capacity. Pupils that contracted vertically like a cat's, reflecting the firelight in disconcerting ways. Nobody attacked. They just watched, their collective breathing creating a background rhythm almost like the drums had moments before. Jack counted at least 20 warriors within striking distance, each bearing weapons that seemed to be grown rather than forged. Crystalline blades that caught the firelight and bent it in impossible ways. Jack kept his hand away from his weapon, arms slightly raised in the universal gesture of, "I come in peace. Please don't kill me." The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire and his own too loud breathing. Sweat trickled down his spine despite the night's chill, his body preparing for fight or flight while his mind calculated the odds of either succeeding. Then she approached, and the crowd parted like water before a blade. The queen moved with predatory precision, each step deliberately placed. Her eyes were silver with flecks of violet, studying him like he was a puzzle she intended to solve by breaking him into component parts. Up close, he could see her tattoos weren't tattoos at all. They were beneath the skin, glowing like fiber optics tracing the paths of her veins. She stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that he could smell her. Ozone and wild orchids with something sharp underneath, like black pepper or ancient spice. Her head tilted. Platinum hair slithered over her shoulder with a sound like silk on glass. The queen inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring as though cataloging his scent. Her pupils dilated slightly, the vertical slits widening with what could have been interest or hunger. "The cosmos has answered." Her voice was exactly as rich as he'd expected, accented in ways that made English sound like symphony. How she knew his language was yet another mystery in a day, filled with them. "They've sent us a sacrifice." The crowd murmured approval. Several women licked their lips. Jack noticed their teeth were just a little too sharp, canines that could actually tear flesh instead of just threatening to. The hunger in their eyes wasn't entirely metaphorical, he realized with a cold certainty that settled in his gut like lead. "Ma'am," Jack said, surprised to find his voice steady, despite the hammering of his heart against his ribs. "I just survived a crash landing. I'm not anybody's dinner." She blinked, once, twice. Then her lips curved in what might have been a smile, or might have been a threat display, revealing teeth that could easily tear through his throat. "Dinner?" She rolled the word around her mouth like sampling exotic wine, seeming to derive amusement from his misunderstanding. "You think we wish to eat you?" The crowd laughed, a sound like wind chimes caught in a hurricane, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Jack felt himself flushing, embarrassment mixing with fear in a cocktail that left him disoriented. Several women pressed closer, and Jack fought the urge to reach for his weapon. They weren't attacking, just investigating with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Fingers traced the tears in his flight suit, touched the bruises forming on his jaw, measured the breadth of his shoulders with scientific precision. Their touch left tingling sensations that lingered long after they moved on, as though their skin carried some kind of mild bioelectric charge. "You misunderstand, Starfaller," the queen gestured, and the touching grew bolder. Someone's hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the thin fabric of his undershirt. Another tugged at his hair, rubbing the dark strands between fingers, like testing fabric quality. A third traced the line of his jaw with a touch that was neither completely clinical nor entirely sensual, but something uncomfortably between. "We haven't seen a male in a 113 cycles," the queen continued, her silver eyes tracking the exploration of his body with unsettling intensity. "You're not dinner." Her smile widened, showing those sharp teeth that now seemed designed for more than just tearing flesh. "You're much more valuable than that." Understanding dawned on Jack with horrifying clarity. The way they touched him, the hunger in their eyes that wasn't for food, he'd survived a crash landing only to become something potentially worse than dinner. His muscles tensed, preparing to fight, though against 200 of them, He knew his chances were non-existent. They stripped him with clinical efficiency, not violently, but with a thoroughness that left no room for protest. Jack had experienced violence in his career. This was something else entirely. Curious, methodical, desperate in a way that transcended mere desire. His flight suit peeled away in pieces, the smart fabric already compromised from the crash. His undershirt followed, exposing the tapestry of scars that told the story of his military career. When he tried to resist, to push back, a dozen hands restrained him with gentle but implacable pressure. Their strength was beyond what their frames suggested, making his struggles as effective as pushing against steel. "Peace, Starfaller," the Queen's voice cut through his rising panic. "They mean no harm. Let them see." "See what?" Jack wanted to ask, but then hands were mapping his scars and the words died in his throat. Their touch was reverent, almost worshipful, as though each mark on his body represented something precious rather than violent trauma. "Here," a young warrior with black hair and silver eyes traced the puckered line across his ribs. "Blade wound, deep." She pressed her nose to the mark and inhaled, as though scenting the history of it. "Old. Many seasons. Lingers with memory of pain." Another woman, older with white streaks through midnight blue hair, touched the starburst of scar tissue on his shoulder. "Energy weapon. Military grade. Survived what should have killed." They cataloged his damage like reading a service record, speaking to each other in their liquid language with tones of admiration and assessment. The shrapnel scars from the Europa conflict when his transport had been caught in a mining colony rebellion. The knife wound from that classified operation in New Shanghai that had cost 3 team members their lives. The burn from when his fighter's cockpit had become an inferno during the Battle of the Kuiper Belt, the same battle that had earned him his command stripes and cost him his first love. Each mark examined, discussed in their liquid language, evaluated with scientific precision and something deeper, a respect for survival that transcended species. "He's a warrior," the younger one said again, something like reverence in her voice. "A true warrior, survived more than most, carries death on his skin like a map. Strong genetic material," the older woman nodded. "Resilient stock. His offspring would strengthen the next generation." The clinical assessment of his reproductive value should have repulsed him, but Jack's body was betraying him in unexpected ways. Their touches, the press of alien bodies around him, the sweet scent of their skin, all combined to create a response he couldn't entirely control. Shame and desire tangled together in his gut. "Remember Antarctica, Sullivan," he told himself, forcing his breathing to remain steady as more hands explored. 17 days, no extraction. You survived that. You can survive this. The mantra of past survival had carried him through countless situations, but none quite like this one. But Antarctica had tried to kill him with cold indifference. This felt more like being slowly dissolved in honey, a pleasurable disintegration that terrified him more than straightforward violence ever could. "Enough!" The Queen's command cut through the exploration. The hands withdrew reluctantly, leaving Jack feeling oddly cold despite the jungle's humidity. The absence of their touch was almost as disorienting as their presence had been. "Bring him forward." The crowd shifted, creating a pathway to the fire. Jack grabbed the remains of his shirt, holding it rather than wearing it. The fabric was too shredded to provide any real coverage. Dignity seemed a fragile human concept that had no place in this alien ritual. As he walked, flanked by warriors whose eyes tracked him with disturbing intensity, he heard whispers in that flowing language. One word repeated, "Astrogen." "What does that mean?" he asked the young warrior with silver eyes who had traced his rib scar. Her presence felt slightly less threatening than the others, though he couldn't have explained why. "Astrogen," she corrected his pronunciation with a smile that showed too many teeth. "It means—" She paused, searching for the translation. "Last light, final ember, the one who burns when all other fires have died." Jack's step faltered. Last light. The same thing Captain Reynolds had called him when he'd volunteered for the rearguard action that had saved 67 civilians during the Mars colony evacuation. The same thing his squad had whispered when he dragged them through a radiation storm that should have killed them all. A nickname he'd never shared with anyone outside his unit. How could you possibly know that? A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with his partial nudity. "We don't know," The warrior's silver eyes reflected the firelight like mirrors. "We simply see. Your body tells the story. You are one who survives, who endures, who refuses to extinguish." Her hand brushed his arm, and those subcutaneous tattoos flared brighter, as though responding to his proximity. "Exactly what we need." The queen studied him from her diamond throne as he approached. This close to the fire, sweat beaded on Jack's skin, making him acutely aware of his partial nudity, of the way every woman watched him like he might evaporate if they blinked. Their collective attention felt like a physical weight. "Tell me, Starfaller," she crossed her legs, a motion that shouldn't have been as hypnotic as it was. "How many lives have you taken?" The question landed like a physical blow. Jack's jaw tightened, memories flooding back. The faces of those he'd killed in battle, the dreams that still woke him in the night. The pirate captain whose throat he'd cut during the Titan Moon hostage crisis. The 3 militia soldiers during the Europa conflict. The young rebel in New Shanghai who couldn't have been more than 17. "That's a hell of an icebreaker." His voice emerged harsher than intended, defensive and raw. "Answer." Not a request. A command that resonated with something primal in him, something that recognized authority beyond rank or title. He met her silver gaze, saw something ancient looking back. "Enough to know when I'm being hunted." Her laugh rolled through the clearing, rich and dark like expensive liquor. "Hunted? No." She rose from the throne with liquid grace, descending the carved steps. Each movement made her tattoos pulse brighter, creating patterns that drew the eye and wouldn't release it. Jack found himself unable to look away, caught in the mathematical perfection of the swirling designs. "You're being evaluated." She circled him slowly. Jack stood still, military training keeping his posture straight, despite the urge to turn, to track the predator stalking around him. Her fingers trailed across his shoulders, nails just sharp enough to raise goosebumps. The contact left trails of sensation, like static electricity, but warmer, more intimate. "You smell of war," she murmured, close enough that her breath stirred the hair at his nape. "Metal and smoke, blood and determination." She inhaled deeply, as though his scent contained information beyond what his appearance could tell her. But something else. Loss. Grief held so tight it's become part of your bones. Jack's hands clenched into fists. She was too close, reading too much from too little. The memories surfaced unbidden. Davis's face as the hull breach sucked her into vacuum. The sound of Torres's final transmission as his pod entered the atmosphere at the wrong angle. Captain Reynolds pushing him into the last functioning escape pod while staying behind herself. "Everyone loses people in war." The words felt hollow, inadequate against the weight of what he'd witnessed. "Yes." Her finger traced the line of his jaw, and her tattoos flared hot silver where she touched him. The sensation shot straight down his spine, electric and alien and impossibly intimate. But not everyone survives the losing. Not everyone carries the dead inside them and continues walking. The surrounding women hissed, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through leaves. Several pressed closer, held back only by some invisible protocol Jack didn't understand. The hunger in their eyes had transformed into something else, a desperate need that went beyond the physical. The Queen's hand dropped to his chest, palm flat against his heartbeat. "You interest me, Starfaller. It has been so very long since anything has interested me." There was a weight of centuries in her voice, a weariness that matched his own. Her tattoos pulsed in time with his pulse, and Jack had the disturbing sensation of his heartbeat synchronizing to their rhythm, as though their bodies were establishing communication on a level beyond language. "What is your name?" The question felt monumental, as though giving her this piece of himself would create a bond he couldn't break. "Sullivan." His voice emerged rougher than intended. "Commander Jack Sullivan." "Jack." She tested the name, making the consonants dance in a way that transformed it into something almost musical. "I am Amara, Queen of the Azurian tribes, Keeper of the Eternal Flame, Last Daughter of the Falling Stars." Each title made her tattoos burn brighter until looking at her was like staring at lightning through blue glass. Power radiated from her in waves that Jack could almost physically feel against his skin. "And you, Jack Sullivan, are now under my protection." The crowd stirred, voices rising in protest or approval. Jack couldn't tell which. The reaction seemed divided, with some women nodding in satisfaction while others bristled with visible displeasure. Amara raised her hand, and silence fell like a curtain. The absolute authority she commanded was unlike anything Jack had witnessed, even in the strictest military hierarchies. Until the rite of selection, no one touches him without my permission. He is marked by my hand, sheltered by my word. Her voice carried a finality that seemed to resonate in the very air. But my queen, an older woman stepped forward, elaborate silver-threaded braids marking her as someone important. Her eyes held calculation and something darker, resentment perhaps. Tradition demands. Tradition. Amara's voice could have frozen flame. Tradition has given us 113 cycles of emptiness. Tradition has watched our numbers dwindle, our children grow fewer, our strength fade like morning mist. There was rage beneath the words, a barely controlled fury that made the air around her seem to shimmer. She touched Jack's face again, and this time her hand was gentle, almost tentative. Perhaps it's time for new traditions. The elder's face twisted, but she bowed, though the motion appeared more perfunctory than sincere. As you will, my queen, but the selection must still occur. The tribes must still be sustained. Sustained? Jack didn't like the sound of that, the implications hidden behind the innocuous word. Amara's smile was all edges. Oh yes, Natasha, the selection will occur in 3 days' time, as tradition demands. Her fingers trailed down Jack's throat, feeling his pulse jump beneath her touch. But until then, he is mine to protect, mine to evaluate. The pause stretched like a blade being drawn. Mine! The possessive note in that single word sent ripples through the crowd. Several women turned away, shoulders tight with suppressed emotion. Others stared with open hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the famine Amara had mentioned. 113 years without men. Jack couldn't begin to imagine what that meant for a species that still required males for reproduction. Jack swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. And what exactly happens at this selection? Though part of him suspected he already knew, and the knowledge made his blood run both cold and hot simultaneously. Amara's laugh was dark honey poured over broken glass. Why, Jack Sullivan, that's when we decide if you're strong enough to survive being loved by us. Her hand pressed against his chest again, and he felt that alien electricity arc between them, stronger this time, almost painful in its intensity. You see, in our culture, mating is intense. Her voice dropped to a register that seemed to vibrate in his bones rather than his ears. It transfers life force, creates bonds that transcend flesh. It can heal or harm, create or destroy. She leaned close enough that her lips brushed his ear, sending shivers through his entire body. And after 113 cycles without release, without connection, without the balance males provide, well, her teeth grazed his earlobe, sharp enough to sting, but not quite hard enough to draw blood. Let's just say our control has become somewhat theoretical. Jack's military mind cataloged the threat even as his body responded to her proximity. The idea that sex could be lethal wasn't new. There were legends on Earth about creatures that killed their mates. But the clinical way she described it sent ice through his veins. You're saying you might literally love me to death? Oh, Starfaller. Amara pulled back, her silver eyes bright with amusement and something darker, more primal. That's exactly what I'm saying. Water sang through crystal. Jack followed Amara through corridors carved from living stone, the walls pulsing with the same bioluminescent heartbeat that infected everything on this world. The sound of water grew louder, not rushing but trickling, musical, like 1,000 tiny bells playing a melody just beyond his comprehension. His bare feet whispered against floors polished smooth by centuries of passage, still warm from the day's heat. The palace, if that was the right word for this organic, breathing structure, felt alive in ways human architecture never could. Veins of luminescent material ran through the walls like blood vessels, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Your people build with dead things, Amara said without turning. Her platinum hair swayed with each step, hypnotic in the blue-violet glow. Metal and polymer, things that never lived, can never truly die. Efficient, Jack replied, though he was beginning to understand the appeal of living architecture. The palace breathed around them, air moving through channels he couldn't see, carrying scents of night-blooming flowers and that ever-present sweetness that made his head swim. The entire structure seemed to exist in a state between solid matter and living organism. Efficient, she tasted the word like something bitter. Your language has many words for surviving, few for living. There was a depth of sadness in her voice that caught him off guard. Not just disappointment with human language, but a profound melancholy that seemed to reach beyond their conversation. She stopped at an archway covered by what looked like silk, but moved like water, shimmering with iridescent patterns that shifted and flowed without wind. The curtain parted at her approach as though sensing her presence, and Jack caught his breath. The chamber beyond was vast, carved from a single massive geode. Sapphire walls caught and threw light in blue cascades, creating an underwater effect that made him momentarily dizzy. Water ran through channels cut into the floor, feeding pools that steamed gently in the humid air. The ceiling was transparent crystal, showing stars he didn't recognize through a lattice of platinum branches that seemed to grow directly from the structure. But it was the bed that made him pause. A massive circle of what looked like woven moonstone, suspended from the ceiling by chains that sang softly when air moved through them. The bed was large enough to accommodate at least 6 humans comfortably, covered in fabrics that shimmered with the same iridescence as Amara's minimal clothing. "You're putting me here?" The question came out more vulnerable than he intended, betraying his uncertainty about what exactly his protection entailed. His voice came out rougher than intended. Amara turned, her silver eyes catching the sapphire light, transforming them into pools of liquid mercury. "You expected a cell? Bars and guards?" She moved closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. The temperature difference between them was substantial. She ran several degrees hotter than a human, giving off warmth like a banked fire. "You're under my protection, Jack Sullivan. That means you stay where I can protect you. In your bedroom." He tried to make it sound casual, but the implications hung heavy in the air between them. "My chamber has many rooms." She gestured to archways he hadn't noticed, leading to other spaces beyond. "But yes, here, where I sleep." Her smile showed teeth, sharp and predatory. "Where I can hear if someone tries to claim what I've marked as mine." The possessiveness should have alarmed him, but instead it sent a complicated mix of emotions through him. Wariness, certainly, but also a strange security. In a world where everything was alien, at least her intentions seemed clear. Thunder rolled overhead, and Jack realized the storm that had been building all day had finally arrived. Rain hit the crystal ceiling in sheets, turning the stars to streaming light. The sound created a cocoon around them, isolating this moment from everything else. His crashed ship, his dead crew, the uncertain future ahead. "I'll take the floor," he said, gesturing to the open space near one wall. Military training had taught him to sleep anywhere, and the floor looked more comfortable than many places he'd rested during campaigns. Her laugh was dark velvet. "The floor? When there's a bed that could hold a dozen warriors?" She moved to a pool, began unwinding the complex braids of her hair with practiced motions. "Your prudish earth sensibilities are showing, Starfaller." She dropped her minimal clothing without ceremony and slipped into the water. Jack turned away, though not before catching a glimpse of her form, powerful and graceful in a way that wasn't quite human, but was undeniably beautiful. He heard her chuckle at his reaction, the sound warm with genuine amusement. 113 years without men, and you think modesty still exists here?" Water splashed as she moved through the pool. "Come, you smell of crash fire and fierce sweat. Bathe, or I'll have the younglings do it for you." They were quite eager to volunteer. Jack thought of those hungry eyes, those eager hands that had cataloged his scars with scientific intensity. The idea of being surrounded by them again, vulnerable and naked, was enough to propel him toward the water. He stripped efficiently, military quick, and found another pool on the far side of the chamber. The water was perfect, just hot enough to sting, smelling of minerals that made his bruises ache less. He sank to his neck, let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The accumulated tension of the day, the ship's destruction, the crash, the ritual, began to seep from his muscles into the welcoming heat. "Better," Amara's voice carried across the space. a statement rather than a question. Yeah. He watched Rain pattern the ceiling, tried not to think about the fact that he was naked in an alien queen's bedroom while she bathed 20 feet away. His situation had moved beyond standard military protocols into something no training manual had ever covered. This normal for you? Keeping prisoners in your quarters? He kept his tone conversational, fishing for information while appearing casual. You're not a prisoner. Water moved. She was standing, walking to the edge of her pool. Jack kept his eyes firmly on the ceiling, following the patterns of raindrops as they slid across the crystal. You're a possibility. Of what? The question felt bigger than the words that formed it. Survival, evolution, change, Silk whispered. She was dressing, the sound somehow both mundane and intimate in the steam-filled chamber. My people are dying, Jack. Slowly, generation by generation, but dying nonetheless. The living matrices produce only female children now. Each generation is weaker than the last. We need a man. We need genetic diversity. We need strength. We need someone who won't break under the weight of our hunger. Her words carried the weight of responsibility he recognized from his own command experience. The crushing pressure of knowing others depended on your decisions, your strength. For the first time, he saw her not just as a predator or potential threat, but as a leader carrying an impossible burden. Footsteps approached his pool. Look at me. He did. She wore a robe that might have been spun moonlight clinging to damp skin. Her tattoos pulsed slower now, almost sleepy, like stars seen through atmosphere. With her hair unbound and her formal demeanor softened, she looked younger, almost vulnerable. You survived your crash. You survived our greeting. You survived being inspected like breeding stock without losing your dignity. She knelt at the pool's edge, traced one finger through the water, creating ripples that expanded outward. Most males of our sister species go mad from the pheromones alone. You're still sane. Still me. Barely, Jack admitted, the confession slipping out before he could stop it. The events of the day pressed against his mind. The ship breaking apart, his crewmates dying around him, the alien ritual, the hunger in the women's eyes. It was too much for any human to process at once. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The lights flickered, dimmed to almost nothing. In the darkness, Amara's tattoos glowed brighter, painting her in silver fire. She seemed both more alien and more beautiful in that moment, a creature of light and mystery. Sleep, she said, standing. Tomorrow you teach us your earth ways. It's not magic. It's just survival. The words felt inadequate against the vastness of what separated their species. Yes, you've mentioned. She moved to the suspended bed, climbed in with boneless grace. Take any cushions you need for your floor, Starfaller, though the bed is warmer, safer. The idea of safety felt distant, almost theoretical, but exhaustion was rapidly overcoming weariness. Jack pulled himself from the pool, found a towel that felt like concentrated cloud, and gathered cushions near the wall. The sound of rain created a cocoon of white noise. He was almost asleep when lightning illuminated everything. Amara stood beside his makeshift bed, her robe a shimmer in the darkness. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, catching the light of her tattoos in ways that created a halo effect. The storms here are violent, she said. Electromagnetic. They affect our neurochemistry, make us restless. Another flash. She was trembling slightly. Her tattoos pulsed erratically like a heartbeat in panic, creating patterns that seemed chaotic rather than the ordered mathematics they displayed earlier. You're afraid, Jack said, sitting up, recognizing the signs of distress, even across species. Not afraid. Affected. The electrical charge. Thunder drowned her words. When it passed, she was closer, and Jack could see fine tremors running through her body. Our systems are attuned to the planet's electromagnetic field. During storms, the disruption is difficult. Your people sleep alone? The question held more vulnerability than she'd shown previously. Jack's mouth went dry. When there's not a queen who might consume them, yeah. The attempt at humor fell flat even to his own ears. She laughed, soft and uncertain. May I? Lightning thunder. She was already sliding down beside him, her back to his chest. Just until the storm passes. She radiated heat like a forge. Every breath brought her scent, ozone and flowers, and something uniquely her that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to his limbic system. Her tattoos pulsed against his chest where they touched, creating sensations that weren't quite painful, but weren't exactly comfortable either. "You're burning up," he said, concerned despite himself. "Normal. Our body temperature runs higher." She shifted, pressing closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I won't bite, unless asked." The words should have been threatening, but there was a vulnerability beneath them that caught him off guard. Jack's arm came around her waist, protective, not possessive. The soldier in him responding to weakness with instinctive shelter. "Storm that bad? The storm outside? No." She turned her head slightly, her breath warm against his throat. "The one inside is worse." The simple admission revealed more about her than everything that had come before. Behind the power, behind the predatory grace and alien majesty, she was as lonely as he was, perhaps more so, carrying the weight of her dying people. They lay listening to rain and thunder, her body gradually relaxing against his. Just before sleep took him, Jack heard her murmur, "First male in my bed in over a century, and he sleeps on the floor by choice. The cosmos has a cruel sense of humor." Morning brought curious faces and eager hands. 50 young warriors gathered in the training ground, a natural amphitheater carved from blue basalt. They whispered among themselves, silver and violet eyes tracking Jack's every movement with unnerving intensity. Their excitement was palpable, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation. Amara watched from a raised platform, ostensibly discussing something with her advisors, but her attention clearly elsewhere. Jack could feel her gaze on him like a physical touch, evaluating his performance as much as protecting him from the warrior's enthusiasm. "Right," Jack said, setting down his salvage supplies. "Your queen asked me to teach you Earth ways. But here's the thing, they're not mysterious or magical. It's just knowing how things work." He tried to project confidence despite feeling like an exhibit in an alien zoo. "Commander," the bold warrior from the night before stepped forward, black hair with streaks of silver, body coiled like a spring ready to release. Her eyes held challenge and something else, a hunger that had nothing to do with knowledge. "Show us these not magic ways, Starfaller." Jack pulled out a chocolate bar from his ration pack, one of the few things that had survived the crash intact. Then he produced an aluminum can, empty and scraped from the pod supplies. The mundane object seemed absurdly out of place against the crystalline architecture and alien biology surrounding him. "Watch." He broke off a piece of chocolate, rubbed it on the can's concave bottom. The warriors pressed closer, close enough that their collective body heat made him sweat. Their curiosity was almost childlike in its intensity, though nothing else about them resembled children. "The oils in the chocolate act as a polish, makes the surface reflective." His voice fell into teaching mode, the same tone he'd used training new recruits back on Earth. He angled the can toward the morning sun, focused the light on dried moss he'd gathered, waited, counted breaths. Smoke first, then fire bloomed from nothing, a small miracle of physics and chemistry. The warriors erupted, shouts, gasps, hands reaching for the can. Someone said sorcery in their language, the word recognizable despite its alien phonology. Their reactions were so extreme that Jack wondered what kind of fire-starting methods they used. Jack held up the can, let them see their own reflections in the polished bottom. "Not magic, science. Light concentrates heat. Enough heat makes fire." He handed the can to the black-haired warrior. "Try it, Ilara," she supplied, eyes wide as she took the can. "My name is Ilara." "Try it, Ilara." The small connection of names felt significant, a bridge across the vast gulf between their species. While they practiced, burning through his chocolate supply with enthusiastic inefficiency, Jack set up his next demonstration: water purification. He'd found local materials that worked: sand, charcoal from their fires, cloth woven from plant fibers. The simple technology felt absurdly primitive against their living architecture, yet they watched with fascination. "Clean water is life," he said, pouring murky pond water into his makeshift filter. "My people learned this the hard way. Lost whole armies to disease before we figured out that clear doesn't mean clean." The history of human warfare condensed into a single sentence: millennia of suffering and adaptation. A woman knelt beside him, soft where the warriors were hard, with violet eyes like twilight. Her movements were more graceful than the others, less predatory, suggesting a different role in their society. Her hands brushed his as she helped pour, lingering longer than necessary, the contact sending small sparks of that now familiar bioelectricity through his skin. Your people were warriors. All of them, she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. No, but we had our wars, still do. Water dripped through the filter, coming out clearer with each pass. Humans are good at surviving, better at killing each other. The admission tasted bitter on his tongue. But you survived both. Her fingers traced a scar on his forearm, gentle but insistent. The touch was different from the warrior's, contemplative rather than possessive. These marks, they're not all from enemies. Jack pulled his arm away. Some wounds you give yourself. The memory surfaced. A botched mission on Titan, 3 civilians dead because of his miscalculation, the knife he'd pressed against his own skin in the darkness of his quarters afterward. Amara's advisor, Natasha, approached, young for her position, with platinum hair threaded with blue, tattoos that spiraled in patterns, suggesting rank. Her eyes held calculation and thinly veiled hostility. My queen, she said loudly enough for all to hear, he teaches them to make fire from sweets, to clean water with sand. Parlor tricks. Her dismissal was clearly political, an attempt to undermine whatever position Jack was establishing. Parlor tricks that could save lives, Amara replied, not taking her eyes off Jack. How many have we lost to waterborne illness in the dry seasons? How many times have our firekeepers failed? He undermines tradition. Natasha's voice carried enough for everyone to hear, making her objection public rather than private counsel. He offers alternatives. Amara stood, descended from the platform with dangerous grace. Watch. She moved to Jack's side, close enough that every warrior noticed, noted, remembered. The deliberate display of favor wasn't subtle, and Jack realized he was being used as a piece in a political game he didn't fully understand. The knowledge should have angered him, but survival often meant playing roles in others' designs. Show them something else, Starfaller. Something that proves Earth's strength isn't just tricks. Jack considered. Then he spotted the training weapons, weighted staffs that the warriors used for combat practice. Here, at least, was familiar territory. Combat was a language he spoke fluently. All right, your people fight with strength and speed, yeah? He picked up a staff, tested its weight. The balance was different from Earth weapons, but workable. We fight with physics. He demonstrated leverage, showing how a smaller person could throw a larger one using the opponent's own momentum. The principle was universal. Mass, velocity, angles of force. He had Alara attack him, used her momentum against her, sent her flying with minimal effort. The warriors murmured appreciation, recognizing effective technique even across cultural boundaries. Again, Alara demanded, brushing dirt from her leathers. There was no anger in her voice, only eager determination to learn, to master. This time when she charged, she pressed close, bodies tangling more than fighting. Her movements became less about combat and more about contact, creating unnecessary points of connection between them. Your techniques require contact, she observed, her breath hot against his neck, voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. Interesting approach. Distance is safety, Jack said, untangling himself from her deliberately slow pin. The words were as much reminder to himself as instruction to her. But sometimes, Amara's tattoos flared bright enough to leave after images, her interruption deliberate and pointed. Sometimes, Alara, distance is what kills you. Step back. Alara obeyed, but her smile promised this wasn't over. There was something predatory in her compliance, a hunter backing away only to stalk more effectively later. The morning progressed. Jack taught them about creating shelters that breathed, about reading weather patterns, about the tactical advantages of high ground. With each lesson, he noticed things. Guards that shouldn't be there, watching from wrong angles. Symbols etched on walls that Amara's people carefully didn't acknowledge. Political currents running beneath the surface of cooperation. During a water break, he approached Amara. You've got a problem. Several. Be specific. Her tone was wry, suggesting leadership burdens that transcended species. Someone's marking territory. Those symbols, they're not yours. He gestured subtly toward carvings that seemed deliberately placed to challenge her authority. Her jaw tightened. Observant. Yes. The exiled ones grow bold. Natasha's faction. You were listening last night? The question was half accusation, half confirmation of his suspicions about their political structure. Something in her voice suggested approval. She believes you should be given to the old gods, consumed properly, ritually, your life force distributed among all tribes. The clinical description of his potential sacrifice contrasted jarringly with her conversational tone. And you? She turned to face him fully. In daylight, her blue skin showed subtle patterns like waves beneath ice, biological markers that might indicate emotion or status. I believe you're worth more alive, teaching, breeding, changing us. Romantic. The sarcasm slipped out before he could stop it. Her laugh was sharp. Romance is luxury, Starfaller. Survival is necessity. But her hand brushed his and her tattoos pulsed warm. Though sometimes they overlap. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as him. 3 warriors vanished that night. Jack woke to shouting, Amara already gone from her bed. They'd maintained separate sleeping arrangements despite the storm passing. He grabbed his pants, stumbled out to find chaos, warriors running through corridors, advisors gathered in urgent conference, fear palpable in the air. Taken from their post, Natasha was saying. No signs of struggle. Her face betrayed no emotion, but something in her stillness seemed calculated rather than calm. They went willingly, Amara said, voice deadly calm, or were compelled to. The festival approaches. Her eyes tracked something beyond physical space, possibilities and threats that Jack couldn't see. Natasha emerged from shadow, making everyone reach for weapons. The advisor looked unchanged from the first night, ancient, powerful, patient as stone. Her stillness was different from the warriors, not the readiness before attack, but the confidence of one who has already won. Some question whether the Starfaller should participate in the selection. Her voice carried no inflection, but the threat was clear nonetheless. He's under my protection. Amara's words crackled with authority. Your protection? Natasha smiled. Not your ownership. The selection is for all tribes. All have claim. She spread her hands in a gesture of reasonableness that didn't reach her eyes. She turned those flat silver eyes on Jack. You teach them fire-making, Starfaller. But do you understand the fire you've lit? 113 years of hunger doesn't simply dissipate because a queen claims first rights. As if summoned by her words, Ilara appeared in fighting clothes that left little to imagination. She approached Jack with predatory intent, each step calculated to display her physical perfection. Spar with me, she said, not asking, demanding. The challenge was multi-layered, testing his skill, Amara's protection, the boundaries of this strange new arrangement. Jack looked to Amara, saw the test in it, refuse and show weakness, accept and risk whatever Ilara had planned. Either choice revealed something about his character, his adaptability, his willingness to engage with their culture. Sure, he stepped forward, accepting the inevitable. The training circle cleared. Ilara stretched, every movement designed to display her body. Blue skin sheened with oil that caught the light, making her seem carved from living sapphire. Black hair bound back in warrior braids, tattoos spiraling in patterns that drew the eye to dangerous curves. Everything about her posture screamed predator, and Jack knew with certainty that this wasn't just combat practice. First blood, she asked, taking a fighting stance that emphasized both deadliness and sensuality. First submission, Amara countered from outside the circle, her voice carrying absolute authority. Ilara's smile was all teeth. Better. The single word contained volumes of intention. She moved like water over rocks, fluid, inevitable, gorgeous. Jack had hand-to-hand training, years of it, but she had centuries. Their bodies crashed together, separated, crashed again in a dance that blurred the line between combat and courtship. She used everything, nails, teeth, the weight of her chest against his back when she almost had him pinned. You smell good, she whispered, grinding against him in a motion too deliberate to be combat. Like war and want. Jack bucked, threw her off, rolled to his feet. His body responded traitorously to her proximity, to the alien pheromones that saturated the air around her. She laughed, wild and free, seeing his reaction and understanding its significance. The queen shares her chamber but not her bed. You must be so frustrated. The insinuation carried an offer, one that bypassed words entirely. She came at him again. This time when they grappled, her hands slipped between them, cupped him through his pants. Jack's concentration shattered for just a second. Military discipline losing ground to more primal instincts. Amara's voice cracked like a whip. Enough! Elara had him pinned, throat exposed to her teeth, but she pulled back at her queen's command. The warrior's expression was mixed. Disappointment at the interruption, satisfaction at having proven something to the watching crowd. He's not ready, she said, standing slowly, making sure to drag her body along his as she rose. The selection will devour him. The words were ostensibly addressed to Amara, but her eyes remained fixed on Jack, evaluating his reactions, measuring his potential. That evening, the violet-eyed woman from the training grounds attended the scratches Elara had left. Nothing serious, but the healer insisted on treatment. Her chamber smelled of herbs and something chemical, like ozone after rain, medicinal and soothing after the chaos of the day. She marked you deliberately, the healer said, spreading salve that tingled then numbed. Surface wounds, but in patterns. See? She traced the scratches with one finger, outlining designs that seemed random, but apparently held meaning. Ownership marks, claims she has conquered you. I didn't submit. Jack's pride stung more than the wounds. No, but you didn't win either. Her hands were gentle on his skin, too gentle, conveying compassion that transcended species. The warriors see you as prize, the advisors as sacrifice. What do you see me as? Jack caught her wrist as her touch wandered lower than the wounds required, the gesture both defense and question. Survivor. She smiled, sad and knowing, with a depth of understanding that suggested she'd seen too much pain. Survival here might require more than you're prepared to give. Your queen seems to think I'm stronger than that. He released her wrist, allowing her to continue her treatment. Our queen needs you to be stronger than that. The healer pulled free, began mixing another salve. Her movements were precise, practiced, the motions of someone who had performed these actions countless times. She hasn't taken a mate in 3 centuries, hasn't shared her bed in longer. The last male she claimed went mad from the bonding. She burned him alive rather than let him suffer. Jack's mouth went dry, memories of the queen's explanation of their mating process returning with new context. The bonding? The breath ritual? Did she not explain? At his blank look, the healer sighed. Of course not. She wants you to choose it freely. She handed him the salve. When our kind mates, truly mates, we share more than bodies. Life force, thoughts, dreams, pain, everything. The male usually can't handle it. Their minds break under the weight of our years. But the ritual, the selection, is diluted, shared among many. No single bond strong enough to kill. She looked away, focusing on cleaning her instruments rather than meeting his eyes. But Amara... Her violet eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the room. Amara wants more than survival. She wants a true mate, an equal. Someone who can carry half her soul without shattering. Thunder rolled in the distance. Another storm coming, bringing with it all the complications and vulnerabilities Jack had witnessed the night before. Apply that twice daily, the healer said, professional mask sliding back into place. And Starfaller, be careful who you let touch you. Every contact leaves marks, visible or otherwise. What's your name? Jack asked as she turned to leave. The simple human courtesy seemed important suddenly, a reminder of connection amid alienation. She paused at the doorway. Lyra, my name is Lyra. The storm hit just after midnight. Jack lay awake, listening to rain-lashed crystal, wondering about Lyra's warning, about the missing warriors, about the symbols that kept appearing on walls. The crash, the ritual, the politics, everything swirled in his mind, keeping sleep at bay despite his exhaustion. Amara stood at the window, silhouetted by lightning. Her posture was rigid, arms wrapped around herself as though holding something in or keeping something out. Can't sleep? He asked, though the answer was obvious. The electrical charge. I told you it affects us. Her voice sounded strained, the usual regal control fraying at the edges. She turned, and her tattoos were so bright they hurt to look at, pulsing with chaotic patterns unlike the mathematical precision they usually displayed. She retrieved something from a carved box, a tube made of crystal or glass twisted into an impossible spiral. It caught light and threw rainbows even in the darkness, resembling something between a scientific instrument and ritual object. "The breath ritual," she said. "Will you share it with me?" The request carried vulnerability he hadn't seen before, even during the previous night's storm. "Lyra said," he began, remembering the healer's warnings about bonding. "I know what she said. She wasn't wrong, but she also doesn't understand." Amara's voice held frustration and something deeper, loneliness that seemed to reach beyond time. "I'm not the same as I was 3 centuries ago. I'm older, yes, but also emptier. The weight might be less than you think." She knelt on cushions, gestured for him to join her. The tube between them caught their reflections, distorted them, merged them in ways that seemed to foreshadow what was to come. "How does it work?" The question was practical, but underneath lay the real uncertainty. What would this do to him, to them? "We breathe together. The crystal harmonizes our life force, creates connection." Her eyes were very silver in the tattoo light, ancient and tired and desperate for something he wasn't sure he could provide. "It's considered more intimate than sex. Sex is bodies. This is souls." Jack studied her face, saw the want there, but also the fear. She was risking something too, opening herself to a connection that could reveal weakness, vulnerability, truth that her position might not allow her to show publicly. Why? The question encompassed everything. Why him? Why now? Why risk this when the selection was approaching? "Because in 3 days the selection will happen whether we want it or not. The tribes will claim you, share you, dilute you among them until there's nothing left but seed and memory." Her hand covered his, the contact warm and electric. "I want to know you first, the real you, before they take that away." Thunder crashed. The lights went out entirely. In the darkness, only her tattoos and the faint luminescence of the storm remained. The moment felt suspended between heartbeats, a decision point that would alter everything that followed. Jack picked up his end of the tube. "Tell me what to do." The choice felt simultaneously like surrender and the first truly autonomous decision he'd made since crashing on this world. "Breathe in when I breathe out. Out when I breathe in. The crystal does the rest." Her voice had dropped to a whisper, reverent and terrified at once. Their lips touched the glass. Her breath filled his lungs, sweet, alien, alive. His breath returned to her. The crystal began to glow, faint at first, then brighter with each exchange. The sensation was unlike anything Jack had experienced. Not psychoactive drugs, not oxygen deprivation, not the heightened awareness of combat. This was consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his skull, reaching outward into something larger. The world shifted. He could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own. No, it was his own. They shared the rhythm, blood moving in perfect synchronization. The boundaries between them blurred, not erased but made permeable. Her thoughts brushed his, not words but impressions. Loneliness vast as space, stretching across centuries of isolation. Hunger sharp as broken glass. Desire not just for physical contact but for understanding. Hope fragile as sponge sugar, so easily destroyed by disappointment but never quite extinguished. "Show me," her voice in his mind, curious and hungry for connection. Antarctica exploded behind his eyes. 17 days of hell, drinking melted ice, eating emergency rations that tasted like cardboard, dragging Wilson's broken body through blizzards that wanted to bury them both. The desperate certainty that no rescue was coming, that his life would end in white oblivion. The moment he'd realized Wilson was dead, had been dead for days, and he'd been talking to a corpse, preserving sanity through imagined conversation. She gave back the century of silence after the last male died, teaching daughters who would never be whole, watching her people slowly fade like stars at dawn. The constant fear that she would be the last queen, presiding over the extinction of her species. The night she'd stood at this very window and considered walking into the jungle, letting something eat her rather than face another century of slow death. Their breathing cycled, in, out, in, out. The crystal sang between them, a note felt in bones rather than heard, harmonizing their separate biological rhythms into something new. He shared the moment his ship disintegrated around him, the second of weightless terror before the pod ejected, the smell of burning flesh, his own, as he manually released the stuck hatch. The certainty that this backwater planet would be his grave, that his name would join the long list of explorers who disappeared into the void, the crushing responsibility of likely being the last survivor of his crew. She shared the first moment she'd seen him, crashed into their ritual like destiny, the way his defiance had lit something she'd thought dead, the terrifying hope that maybe he could be the answer they'd prayed for. The fear that this hope would prove false like all the others before it, leaving her more broken than if she'd never hoped at all. The ritual deepened, barriers dissolved. He felt her blue skin like it was his own, cooler on the surface than human skin, but with a deep internal heat that humans lacked. Understood the tattoos weren't decoration, but neural interfaces, connections to the planet itself, living circuits that processed information in ways human technology couldn't begin to approach. She experienced his human fragility, his mayfly lifetime, and found it beautiful rather than pitiful. So much life crammed into so few years, burning bright and fast where her people smoldered slowly through centuries. The intensity of human emotion, the desperate creativity born of limited time, these were revelations to her. "You're not afraid," her mental voice wondered, touching the core of him where most humans carried existential dread. "Terrified," he admitted, the thought carrying nuances of emotion impossible to convey in words. "But not of you." "Of what then?" He showed her, afraid of failing them, of being the last hope that wasn't enough, of surviving again when everyone else died, the curse of the eternal survivor watching others perish while he endured, the weight of being the astrogen, the last light, when all he'd ever wanted was to be part of something larger than himself. She wrapped that fear in her own, afraid of breaking him, of taking too much, of her hunger consuming what she wanted to save, the terror of opening herself completely only to find incompatibility at their core, the responsibility of leadership that demanded she use him for her people's survival, conflicting with the desperate desire for personal connection. The crystal cracked. They pulled apart, gasping. The tube fell between them, split cleanly down its spiral. Amara's tattoos blazed like silver fire, and Jack realized he could feel them. Not see, feel, like phantom limbs extending from his own nervous system. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she breathed. "The crystal breaking. No." Her voice held equal parts wonder and alarm. She touched his face and he felt it twice. Her hand on his skin under her hand. The sensations mirrored and doubled, creating feedback that should have been overwhelming, but instead felt right, as though a missing piece had been restored. "The equalizing. You shouldn't be able to..." She kissed him, sudden and desperate, and he tasted her thoughts. "Mine. Finally. Mine. Please be strong enough to stay mine." He pulled back, head spinning. "What did we just do?" "Something impossible." Her laugh was wild, bordering on hysterical. "Something that changes everything." Outside, thunder crashed. Inside, their hearts beat in perfect unison, and Jack understood with terrifying clarity that whatever the selection brought, he was no longer entirely his own. He belonged to her now, and goddess helped them both. She belonged to him. The bond had fundamentally altered them both, creating something new that existed neither fully in him nor fully in her, but in the space between. The predators came with the dawn. Jack heard them first, a sound like diamonds scraping against metal, their crystalline shells clicking against stone as they descended from the canopy. 8-legged nightmares with too many eyes, drawn by the pheromone storm of 200 women and one man gathered for the Festival of Moons. "Vexari!" someone screamed. The training ground erupted. Warriors grabbed weapons, formed defensive circles, but the creatures were already among them. Jack watched one leap 30 feet to land on a young warrior's back, mandibles seeking the soft spot where skull met spine. Blood sprayed in an arc of luminescent blue. Time dilated. "Sullivan, northeast quadrant is breached. You're our only chance." The voice wasn't here, wasn't now. New Tokyo, The colony breach. 70 xenomorphs against 15 special forces, and Jack trying to hold a bulkhead with nothing but a jammed plasma rifle in desperation. The screams of civilians echoing in his earpiece. A Vexari lunged at him. Jack moved on instinct, grabbing a training staff, using the creature's momentum to redirect it into stone. Its shell cracked with a sound like shattering glass, releasing a cloud of crystalline dust that sparkled in the morning light. Commander Sullivan, if that position falls, we all die. Past and present blurred. He saw Wilson beside him. No, it was Ilara, bleeding from parallel cuts, fighting with savage grace. The Vexari moved like the xenomorphs had, probing for weakness, using pack tactics. Patterns of attack that transcended biology, predatory logic that remained consistent across galaxies. Form up! Jack's command voice cracked across the chaos. Triangle formations. Cover your backs. Some warriors listened, recognizing authority regardless of its source. Others were too deep in battle, fury to hear, fighting with individual brilliance, but lacking the coordination needed against superior numbers. Amara danced through the carnage, her crystal blades singing as it carved through shells. But there were too many. For every Vexari that fell, 2 more descended from the canopy. Their coordination suggested intelligence or control. Jack! Amara's voice cut through time, dragged him back to the present. Through their bond, he felt her determination and fear, not for herself, but for her people. The Enclave needs you. The Enclave, not the colony, not New Tokyo. Here, now. He pushed aside the flashback, focusing on the immediate threat. Military training kicked in, tactical assessment automatically identifying weaknesses and advantages. Ilara! He grabbed the warrior as she passed, her arms slick with blue blood. Get me accelerant. Anything that burns. The ritual oils. She nodded, understanding immediate even across the language barrier. Perfect. Natasha. The advisor turned, eyes wide with surprise at being addressed directly. Stakes, as many as you can find. Drive them into the ground in a circle, wide as you can make it. They moved, setting aside political divisions in the face of immediate threat. Jack's mind shifted into tactical mode. The same cold clarity that had saved his squad in Antarctica, that had kept him alive when his ship disintegrated. The part of him that calculated survival odds and made decisions without the burden of emotion. What are you doing? Amara demanded, cutting down another Vexari, her blade moving faster than human eyes could track. Making a kill box. He grabbed the oils Ilara brought, began pouring them in patterns he remembered from Special Forces training. These things hunt by sight and smell, yeah? So we blind them. He lit the oil. Fire erupted in controlled lines, herding the Vexari toward the stake circle. The creatures recoiled from the flames, their shells reflecting orange light in fractured patterns. Instinct overrode whatever intelligence guided them, driving them away from the fire and toward what seemed like safety. Now drive them in! The warriors understood, catching his strategy without needing detailed explanation. They became beaters, using fire and spears to force the predators into Jack's trap. The Vexari hissed and clicked, communicating in ways that confirmed Jack's suspicion of hive intelligence. When the last one entered the circle, everyone back! Jack threw his last incendiary, improvised from ritual powders, and the metallic dust that coated everything here. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was hot enough. The Vexari shells cracked, fluids boiling inside until they burst like lethal popcorn. The smell was acrid and chemical, burning the inside of his nostrils. Silence fell, broken only by panting and the crackle of dying fires. Warriors looked at each other, at the dead Vexari, at Jack, reassessing everything they'd thought they understood about the stranger among them. 23 dead, Lyra reported, moving among the wounded. Could have been hundreds. Her voice held both grief for the lost and acknowledgement of what had been saved. Amara approached Jack, silver eyes unreadable. Blue blood, not hers, painted her skin like war paint, transforming her from regal queen to battle goddess. Through their bond, Jack felt her emotional turmoil, grief for the fallen, fury at the attack, pride in their successful defense, and something deeper, more personal directed at him. You saved us. The simple statement carried weight beyond the words themselves. Just applied some earthways, he said, but his hands were shaking. The flashback had been too real. Too close. For a moment he'd been back in that colony, watching civilians die because he hadn't been fast enough, smart enough, strong enough. She caught his hands, steadied them. Through their bond from the breath ritual, he felt her understanding, her recognition of the ghosts he carried, the weight of command, the burden of survival, the guilt of those lost under his protection. These were experiences she knew intimately across her centuries of rule. The festival begins at sunset, Natasha's voice cut through the moment. The advisor stood unmarked by battle, as if the Vexari had simply avoided her. Her immaculate appearance amid the carnage struck Jack as deeply wrong. The selection cannot be delayed. After what? Jack gestured at the carnage around them. This changes nothing? The bodies of fallen warriors were still being gathered, the wounded still crying out as healers worked frantically to save them. Nothing. Natasha's flat silver eyes fixed on Jack. If anything, it proves the urgency. His presence draws predators. Better to complete the ritual before worse things come. Or, Jack said, stepping forward, maybe it proves that working together keeps everyone alive. The battle had demonstrated more than his own combat skills. It had shown what cooperation between their species could achieve. Natasha smiled, cold as starlight. Pretty words, Starfaller, but tradition is not swayed by one battle. She turned to Amara. Sunset, be ready. As she left, taking her faction with her, Jack noticed something. The Vexari attack patterns, the timing, almost like they'd been herded. The precision of the assault, the coordinated approach from multiple angles. It suggested planning beyond animal instinct. Yes, Amara said quietly, following his thoughts through their bond. I noticed too. The game was deeper than Jack had realized, and sunset was coming fast. Someone wanted the selection to proceed regardless of cost, wanted him distributed among the tribes rather than bonded to Amara. The question was why, and what they'd be willing to do to ensure it happened. The arena glowed with bioluminescent fungi, casting everything in blue-violet shadow. 200 women formed a circle, their bodies painted with ceremonial designs that hurt to follow with human eyes. At the circle's heart, a raised platform of polished moonstone reflected the three moons rising in alignment. A celestial event that occurred only once every few decades, according to Lyra. Jack stood at Amara's side wearing the ceremonial garb they'd given him, essentially leather straps that covered nothing important and displayed everything else. He felt like a prize stallion at auction, which wasn't far from the truth. Through their bond, he could feel Amara's tension, her determination, the calculations running behind her calm exterior. The selection begins, Natasha's voice rang out from her position at the platform's north point. Who claims first right? I do. Jack expected Alara, maybe another warrior. He didn't expect Lyra. The healer stepped forward, violet eyes gleaming with determination. Her presence disrupted the expectations, introduced a variable that hadn't been accounted for. I claim the right of healing. The Starfaller has shown resilience beyond measure. That seed should strengthen our medical caste. Her voice carried clear and strong, surprising from one who had seemed so gentle in private. Accepted, Natasha said before Amara could speak. Who else? I claim the right of war. Now Alara, as expected, her body a weapon barely contained by ceremonial paint. The hunger in her eyes had only grown stronger since their sparring match. More stepped forward, a dozen, 20, each claiming an aspect of him like dividing meat from bone. The ritual turned his stomach, not just the objectification, but the certainty that being divided among them would destroy whatever unique connection he'd formed with Amara. Through their bond, he felt her growing anger, banked under control but burning hot. Enough, Amara said, voice carrying without effort. You cannot stop the selection? Natasha's eyes narrowed, triumph lurking behind the challenge. The political trap was closing, forcing Amara to either relinquish her claim or openly defy tradition. I don't stop it. Amara stepped forward, and her tattoos blazed so bright that several women stepped back. I challenge it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't in the script, wasn't what Natasha had planned. Jack felt the shift in the atmosphere. Surprise, confusion, anticipation. Explain, Natasha demanded, momentarily thrown off balance. Ancient law. If the claimed male has shown prowess in battle, any who would claim him must prove worthy through combat. Amara's smile was sharp as crystal. He saved us today. That earns him the right of champions. You twist tradition. Natasha's voice held genuine anger now, her careful political mask slipping. I honor it. Amara raised her voice. Who here denies his battle prowess? Who says he hasn't earned the right to have his mate chosen through strength rather than politics? Silence. Even Natasha couldn't deny what all had witnessed during the Vexari attack. Then I call challenge. Single combat. Winner takes all. Amara's declaration hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown with royal authority. Natasha's smile was slow and cold. Challenge accepted, but not by those who claimed. She stepped into the circle. By me. The crowd gasped. Jack felt Amara's shock through their bond, quickly suppressed beneath layers of strategic calculation. This was unexpected, the advisor herself entering combat rather than using a proxy. You're not of breeding age. Amara's objection was technical, buying time to reassess. I'm advisor to the queen. Age is irrelevant to leadership. Natasha's smile suggested this had been her plan all along, that Amara had walked into a trap of her own making. Natasha began removing her robes, revealing a body that should have been ancient, but moved like liquid metal. Centuries of experience contained in form that appeared deceptively frail. Unless you refuse, concede your claim. The challenge carried absolute confidence. Amara snarled, stepped into the circle. Blades or hands? Blades. Natasha produced 2 crystal daggers from nowhere. To submission or death. The finality of the terms sent a chill through the gathered crowd. They circled each other, predators evaluating prey. Natasha moved with inhuman grace, centuries of experience in every step. Amara was younger, stronger, but Jack could feel her uncertainty through their bond. Natasha had been preparing for this moment, perhaps for decades. Amara had been caught unaware. The first clash came fast, crystal ringing against crystal, sparks of energy where the blades met. Natasha's technique was perfect, economical, lethal. Amara fought with passion, fury, but passion made her sloppy. Blood, blue and luminous, spattered the moonstone. Through their bond, Jack felt each cut as though it were his own flesh being opened. The pain was distant but unmistakable, creating a feedback loop of shared suffering. You fight for him, Natasha said, their blades locked. But does he fight for you? She twisted and Amara's blade went flying. The follow-up strike opened a line across Amara's ribs, another across her thigh. Natasha was dissecting her, cut by cut, the methodical dismantling of a younger opponent by one who had centuries to perfect her craft. Jack's hands clenched. Every instinct screamed to intervene, but the warriors around him made it clear. Interfere, and Amara forfeited. Through their bond, he felt her determination, still burning despite the pain, her refusal to yield even as her strength ebbed. She fights for me, Jack thought desperately. When did I become worth dying for? The question resonated through their connection, and he felt her answer, not in words but in certainty. He was worth it because he represented hope, because their bond had shown her a path beyond slow extinction, because in the brief time they'd known each other, they'd created something unique. Amara stumbled. Natasha's blade swept toward her throat in what would be a killing blow. No! Jack broke the circle. Gasps, shouts. Several warriors moved to stop him, but he was already there, catching Natasha's wrist mid-strike. The contact burned with bioelectricity, painful where it had been merely uncomfortable with Amara. You want to devour someone? His voice carried across the arena. Take me. But know this, I choose who I give myself to, and I choose her. The declaration felt right, the first truly autonomous choice he'd made since crashing on this world. You forfeit her claim by interfering, Natasha hissed, eyes wide with triumph. I forfeit nothing. Jack helped Amara stand, felt her blood hot on his hands. Through their bond, he sensed her pain, her exhaustion, but also her fierce pride. I claim the right of substitution. Another old law, right? A male can choose his champion to become his mate. Silence fell, heavy with implications. Traditions, forgotten, laws unused for generations, being invoked in ways that threatened the careful balance of power. That law hasn't been invoked in 300 years, Lyra said softly from the edge of the circle. Because there haven't been males to invoke it, Jack shot back. He faced Natasha. I choose Amara. If you want me, you fight her. But this time, he pulled something from his ceremonial straps, a shard of the broken breath ritual crystal. This time, we fight as equals. The crystal shard pulsed in Jack's hand, still resonating with the connection he and Amara had forged. He pressed it to her palm, and their bond flared to life, stronger, deeper, overwhelming. The sensation was like diving into an ocean after only knowing ponds, the vastness of consciousness expanding beyond individual limits. Trust me, he thought. Always, she replied without hesitation, the certainty of her response warming him from within. Through their connection, he poured everything, his training, his instincts, his human unpredictability. 15 years of combat experience, countless battles across 3 planets, techniques developed through human military history. She gasped as foreign knowledge flooded her. Leverage points, dirty fighting, the beautiful economy of violence stripped of ceremony. This is abomination, Natasha snarled, backing away slightly as Amara's tattoos began to pulse with new patterns. Human mathematics mixed with alien biology. This is evolution, Jack countered. You wanted to devour me? Fine, but we're a package deal now. The declaration was both threat and promise. Amara moved and it was nothing like before. She fought with human brutality and alien grace combined. When Natasha expected traditional forms, Amara gave her street fighting, an elbow to the solar plexus, a sweep that belonged in a bar brawl. Crystal blades became secondary to fists and feet and pure vicious intent. But Natasha adapted. Centuries of experience counted for something. She began predicting the unpredictable, countering fusion with tradition. Her blade found flesh again, Amara's shoulder, her side. Blood flowed, luminous and distracting. You're going to lose, Natasha hissed. And when you do, I'll take him piece by piece. Share him among the tribes until there's nothing left. But Amara laughed. It wasn't humor, it was release. Through their bond, Jack felt her let go of something. Centuries of control, of royal restraint, of being what her people needed rather than what she was. The weight of tradition, the burden of rule, the exhaustion of being the last hope of a dying species, all stripped away in a moment of perfect clarity. You don't understand. Amara's tattoos began to burn. Not silver, but white hot. The patterns shifted from mathematical precision to something wild, organic, evolving in real time. The ritual, it could kill you. Sweetheart, Jack said, loud enough for all to hear. I've been dying since the day I crashed here. But, with you, I finally started living. The words emerged without conscious thought, rising from the place where their minds overlapped. The words hit Amara like lightning. Her tattoos erupted, and suddenly she wasn't just fighting. She was becoming something else. Neither fully herself nor fully influenced by him, but something new that incorporated both. The broken crystal in her hands sang, harmonizing with the one still in Jack's grip. Their shared heartbeat thundered through the arena. Natasha struck, a perfect killing blow, aimed at the junction of neck and shoulder. Amara caught the blade bare-handed. Blue blood ran through her fingers, but she didn't flinch. With her other hand, she drove her own blade through Natasha's shoulder, pinning her to the moonstone platform with terrible precision. Yield, Amara commanded, voice resonating with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a single throat. Natasha spat. Never! Tradition demands... Tradition is killing us. Amara's voice echoed with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a single throat. Jack realized with a shock that he was partially speaking through her, their bond so complete that they were becoming something new, voices and thoughts overlapping like instruments in symphony. We're dying, Natasha, generation by generation. We're fading, but he offers us something else. She pulled the blade free, stepped back. Natasha collapsed, Lyra rushing to tend her despite the political divisions that had separated them. Not conquest, Amara continued, addressing the crowd now. Partnership, not devouring, sharing. Her voice carried the weight of revelation, of transformation that transcended the personal and became cultural. Pretty words, Ilara called out, but the ritual demands... The ritual can evolve. Jack stepped forward, still holding his crystal shard. Your tattoos, they're neural interfaces, right? Biological superconductors. The technological understanding came partially from his own knowledge, partially from what he'd gleaned through their connection. The true nature of Azurian biology that had been hidden beneath tradition and mysticism. Confused nods greeted his assessment. So use them correctly. He pressed his shard to Amara's tattoo, and silver light spread between them like a circuit completing. The sensation was electric, connection forming at biological and quantum levels simultaneously. Not one-way consumption, two-way exchange. The energy you take, you also give back, creating a sustainable loop instead of depletion. To demonstrate, he kissed Amara. It wasn't gentle, it was electric, literal and metaphorical. Their tattoos synchronized, creating a feedback loop that everyone could see. Energy flowing from him to her, from her to him, building rather than depleting. The sensation was overwhelming. Consciousness expanded beyond individual limits. Thoughts and sensations shared without barriers. When they broke apart, both were glowing. Jack could feel the changes. Within himself, alien biology interacting with human physiology, creating something neither fully one nor fully the other. The living matrices, Jack continued, breathless. They're quantum computers, basically. They can be reprogrammed, not just for cloning, but for true genetic combination. You don't need to devour males. You need to partner with them. The revelation wasn't just scientific. It was cultural, a fundamental shift in understanding that could transform their entire society. Heresy, Natasha gasped from where Lyra worked on her shoulder. Evolution, Lyra countered, her young eyes bright with possibility. The Starfaller offers not death, but life. The next hours blurred together in a haze of revelation and revolution. Jack worked with Lyra and the other healers, showing them how the broken crystal could be used as a template. The resonance it carried, his and Amara's combined life force, could be replicated, modified, adapted to create connections that preserve both parties rather than consuming one. It's like vaccination, he explained, struggling to find words they'd understand. A small dose of change that lets the system adapt without being overwhelmed. The medical analogy seemed to resonate with the healers, who understood biological systems better than most. They started with volunteers. Ilara first, brave and bold, pressing a newly prepared crystal to her lips, while Jack breathed into the other end. The connection was different, shallower than with Amara, but stable, sustainable. She pulled away, gasping, but whole. I can feel it, she said, wonder in her voice. Like touching lightning, but not being burned. The awe in her voice transformed her from predator to explorer. The hunger for consumption replaced by hunger for understanding. More tried, each connection unique, colored by personality and intent. Natasha felt like strategy, cool and calculating. Lyra was warm, healing, none as deep as the bond with Amara, but all sustainable. The concept spread through the gathered women, transforming understanding and expectation in ways that would ripple through their entire culture. The children, Lyra said suddenly, if we modify the living matrices with this pattern. Genetic diversity, Jack agreed. Real combination of traits, not just cloning. The implications were enormous. Not just survival, but thriving. Not just continuation, but evolution. As dawn approached, had they really worked through the night? Natasha approached. Her shoulder was bandaged, her pride wounded, but her eyes showed something new. Respect, maybe, or just exhaustion. You would overturn everything, she said to Jack. The accusation lacked its earlier venom, replaced by something closer to resignation. No, he replied. I'd help it grow into something better. The distinction was important, not destruction, but transformation, building on what existed rather than replacing it wholesale. She studied him for a long moment. The old ways have kept us alive for millennia. Surviving isn't living, Amara said, joining them. Her hand found Jack's automatically, their tattoos pulsing in sync. We've been so afraid of dying that we forgot to evolve. The admission cost her, Jack could tell through their bond, acknowledgement that her rule had prioritized preservation over adaptation. Natasha sighed, suddenly looking every one of her centuries. Perhaps it's time for old voices to quiet. Let young ones speak. The concession wasn't complete surrender, but it was acknowledgement of necessary change. She looked at Lyra. You'll need new leadership, new structures. We'll need advisors, Lyra said carefully. Wisdom doesn't become obsolete just because methods change. The diplomatic bridge offered respect while still embracing transformation. A smile ghosted across Natasha's ancient features. Diplomatic. You'll do well. As the third moon set, the festival officially ended. Warriors began dispersing, but the energy was different. Excited rather than desperate. Hopeful rather than hungry. Jack could feel it in the atmosphere. The shift from scarcity thinking to possibility. You did it, Amara said quietly, leaning into Jack's side. Through their bond, he felt her exhaustion, but also her relief, her cautious hope. We did it. No. She turned to face him fully. You showed us a path we couldn't see, too close to our own problems to find solutions. The admission revealed a humility he hadn't initially recognized in her. That's what humans do, Jack said. We adapt. We survive. We find another way. The strengths of his species distilled into their essence. And now, she asked, the selection is done, but differently than ever before. You're not claimed by all, but connected to all. What does that make you? Jack thought about it. His role had transformed from potential sacrifice to partner, from object to subject, from prize to catalyst. The first instead of the last. 6 months later, Jack called out from the scaffolding. Hold it steady. Ilara, left side needs to come up about 8 inches. The construction was a hybrid. Earth engineering meets alien biotechnology. The frame was metal salvage from his crash site, but it was interwoven with living crystal that grew everywhere here. The result was something new, structures that could heal themselves, that grew stronger over time, that hummed with life. The healers are ready, Lyra announced, approaching with a group of women, each carrying one of the modified living matrices. Her position as head of the new council had been formalized 3 months earlier, with Natasha serving as senior advisor. Jack nodded, turned to the crowd gathered to witness this first attempt. Remember, this isn't guaranteed. We're literally rewriting genetic code on the fly. The warning was necessary. Hope had to be tempered with realism. We understand the risks, Natasha said. As the new council member, she'd been instrumental in implementing the changes, bringing centuries of knowledge to the transformation process. Proceed. The first volunteer was one of the youngest warriors, barely past her first century. She'd chosen her partner from the genetic templates they'd recorded, a combination of traits from multiple sources, including some of Jack's DNA. The idea still seemed strange to him. Children created partially from his genetic material without direct biological parenthood. The matrix activated with a sound like singing crystal. Light poured through it, not the harsh silver of before, but something softer, more complex. The warrior gasped, her tattoos flaring as the changes began. The crowd held collective breath, hope and fear balanced on a knife edge. It took hours. Jack held his breath for most of it. It worked, Lyra breathed at last. She's pregnant, truly pregnant, not cloned. The distinction meant everything. Genetic diversity rather than replication, evolution rather than stagnation. The celebration that erupted could probably be heard from orbit. 6 months of theory and preparation, culminating in concrete proof that their species could continue, could evolve rather than merely persist. Later, as evening painted the sky violet, Jack stood at the river's edge. The water reflected 2 moons. The third wouldn't rise for hours. He heard Amara approach before she spoke, felt her through their permanent bond. Regrets? She asked, sliding her arms around him from behind. The question carried genuine concern, about being stuck here, bound to an alien queen, becoming father to a new race. Jack turned in her arms. 6 months had changed her. She looked younger somehow, though that was impossible. Maybe it was just that the weight of extinction no longer bore down on her shoulders. Purpose had replaced desperation, hope had replaced fatalism. My people sing songs about you now, she said, tracing his jaw with one finger. The man who refused to be devoured. And what do you call me? The question was teasing, but held real curiosity. She pulled him close, their bodies fitting together perfectly despite the height difference. Mine. Possessive, accurate. Her kiss was gentle this time. Nothing to prove. Though I suppose I share you in a way, connected to all but belonging to me. Through their bond, he felt her satisfaction with this arrangement. proud of what they'd created together while still treasuring what remained uniquely theirs. Belonging with you, he corrected. Partnership, remember? She laughed, and he felt it through their bond. Joy mixed with desire, mixed with something deeper than love. You humans and your semantics. You aliens and your absolutes. They stood together, watching the river flow toward the sea. In the distance, construction sounds continued, the enclave growing, evolving, becoming something neither fully human nor fully Azurian. The hybrid architecture mirrored the hybrid biology they were creating, fusion rather, then conquest. They called me the last hope back in the wars, Jack said quietly. Funny thing about hope, sometimes it's not about being the last of something, but the first of something new. The first man of a new age. Amara's hand found his chest, feeling his heartbeat. The first father of a hybrid generation. The first partner rather than sacrifice. The first of many, hopefully. That distress beacon might have been dead, but the ship's black box survived. Eventually, someone will come looking and find a world ready to meet them as equals rather than predators. She smiled. Though we might keep the intimidating first impression. Wouldn't want them to think we're soft. Jack laughed. No one who's seen you fight would think that. Good. Her tattoos began to pulse, synchronized with his heartbeat. Because the night is young, and I have plans for you that are anything but soft. As she led him back toward their chamber, built together, mixing earth comfort with alien beauty, Jack marveled at how much had changed. 6 months ago, he'd crashed into a dying world. Now he was helping birth a new one. The sound of 2 heartbeats, perfectly synchronized, followed them into the night. Around them, the jungle sang with life, old and new, alien and familiar, separate yet joined. The first man and his queen writing the opening chapter of something unprecedented. If you like this story, please click the hype button. This video deserves to be popular. Have a nice rest.